in 6 months. All right. Omayana Timidandasya Yananjana Shalakaya Chakshor Nitanjena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam, this beautiful verse. Pangum Langayate Idam Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Guru Dinatalanam. Very nice verse we hear from our gurus and recorded in the scriptures that by the grace of Guru, a mute person can speak and a lame person can cross mountains. So, by the grace of Shri Guru, everything is possible. By the grace of Shri Guru, I'm able to be here with all of you in your good company, and we can try to remember, appreciate the teachings of Sadhu and Shastra. That is our lifeline that makes life meaningful. Otherwise, why are we here, right? Why are we here? Just to eat and sleep and so on. At least we can remember these higher topics. So we had a very nice question come in, as I mentioned, from Robert just a few moments ago, and open up the chat here. Here it is. I've heard you say that chanting isn't an empirical endeavor, but also I heard it said that Krishna consciousness is a great science. I didn't see the second part. Isn't science you do one thing and get the result? Yeah, I suppose it depends on how you're defining science, because there are different definitions for science. But one way of understanding science is, any systematic body of knowledge or set of principles. I actually looked up what are some definitions of science. So here's one: systematic study of nature, a body of knowledge, a scientific method, specialized skill, technique. These are some of the definitions of science. So I would say that, what we are doing, what we're following, it qualifies as a science in the sense that it's not based on on randomness, right? That there is a systematic body of knowledge, there is a systematic set of principles that we're following, and there are formulas in the sense that there are certain equations that will maximize our chances, right, of making advancement. There is, of course, the unpredictable, spontaneous element of Krishna's mercy, Krishna's will, but there are certain formulas which we know will maximize our chances of receiving that, right? There are certain principles that are indispensable in, are prerequisite in receiving that mercy. So in that sense, I think we can say that this is a science, right? And so I took a few notes here on this, so for example, what is one of our core teachings? Taking shelter of Guru and Vaishnava, right? Cultivating the spirit of surrender. That's like a constant. That's a foundational principle, which is, it's just core to our practice. So it's not that, anything goes, it's like that example has been given. When you get on an airplane, you expect your pilot to know about the study, what is it called? Aeronautics, right? They have a deep understanding of that, and they know how to operate a plane. And you expect them to, to have some clear understanding of all these things. But there is a difference, right, between theory and practice. So just like a pilot, like a rookie pilot who's just passed a theory exam, and, you know, a veteran pilot who's been flying for decades, those are two very different things, right? So theory and practice, they're two very different things. So I think that's how we can make some distinction here, that there is an empiric aspect to Krishna consciousness, you know, and having an empiric understanding can help us, right? You know, so, you know, the Siddhanta, right? Understanding the Siddhanta, understanding the conception, you know, there is an aspect of theory, right? And we don't throw that out the window. Welcome, Nazar, Pawan, Anantashesh. You know, there is an aspect to, you know, there is importance that is given to that. Sambandha Gyan, right? Sambandha Gyan. That's a necessary thing. Of course, it's true. There are special rare cases where someone can, you know, just through having a very pure heart and connecting with a very elevated guru, they can bypass everything. That is possible. That has been mentioned by our gurus. But that's a very rare case. And generally, we are encouraged to try to develop our understanding of the Siddhanta and our Sambandha Gyan, right? Under having a clear understanding of what is what, and what is our, having this theoretical understanding of things. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's one well-known verse that is often quoted in this regard, where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, it begins Siddhanta Bolia, Nohoya Alas, something like that it begins. And it means, don't be lazy to understand the Siddhanta. Don't be lazy to understand the Siddhanta, because it will help to strengthen your faith. It will help you to fix your mind in Krishna, right? So we are encouraged to, you know, develop this theoretical understanding. So in that sense, there is an empiric aspect to our cultivation. But the issue is, the point is, we have to understand the limitations of that. And we have to understand that ultimately, what this is goes way beyond the conception that we have in our brain. You know, you could look at, for example, biology, right? The science of life. You could look at botany, the science of plants, right? There's a difference to like your theoretical textbook understanding, and then what's actually going on, right? In the ground, or, you know, in the body. Like those are two different things, right? It's not, you know, your understanding of how a plant grows, you know, the plant growing is not limited by your empiric understanding of it, right? It's far beyond that, right? And then there's also the unpredictable element, right? Like how many cases have there been, right, where persons have survived like a certain death, right, because of that unpredictable element of life and the will of God in the background, right? So you know, we have to understand that the empiric aspect has its limitations. It can take us to a point, right, but not beyond that, you know. That analogy, I think it's Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur who gives it, right? That someone looking at the honey in the jar, right? Like you can give a very, you know, detailed explanation, description, analysis of the chemical components of that honey, the texture of that honey, the taste of that honey, and so on. But that's completely different from the actual experience of eating that honey, right? There, and experiencing the taste of that honey. But it's still valid. The empirical description is still valid and may have some use. But that's on, and in the end, that's only like a tiny aspect of what it actually means to experience the taste of honey, right? So yes, but yes, it can be a tricky thing to navigate, right? That cultivating the empiric aspect, but also side by side, the culture of faith, surrender, and understanding the limitations and of empiricism, and also not being captured by the charm of empiricism, because that's another warning that we're given, right? The attraction of gyan, right? The of knowing everything and understanding everything. It can be dangerous because it's the by the nature of it, you can think you have it, right? But actually you don't. Actually you don't. So it's in a way you could say it's a double-edged sword, right? That we want to cultivate that aspect, but in a careful way, right? And yeah, and I also was thinking it might be nice if we can just maybe have an overview of what are some of these principles. Like if we're saying this is a science, and what are some of those scientific principles? What are some of these foundational, constant principles that are always, always valid, always relevant, always consistent, right, in our progress in Krishna consciousness? And so one of them is very relevant. This principle is very relevant to this discussion. The principle of inviting the Lord's connection through the culture of surrender, right? And when I'm reminded of that famous occasion, right, when Srila Sridhar Maharaj was giving he was challenged, right? There was there was some type of religious gathering in it was Karachi, what is now Pakistan, but that time was still part of India. There was some type of religious gathering, different speakers representing different schools of thought, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj made his presentation. He was challenged afterwards, right, by someone of a impersonal school. God is one, and this type of conception, and we are one with God, and so on. And God is formless, right? Brahman conception that God is formless. And so this person was kind of attacking this point of the personal aspect and the possibility of a personal relationship with God, with divinity, and how it's impossible, saying, that, we are such finite beings. How can we possibly connect with the infinite? How is it really possible for us to have a personal, intimate relationship with this infinite being? And Srila Sridhar Maharaj responded very brilliantly, right? Saying that, yes, you are right. It is not possible for us to approach the infinite, but at the same time, it must be within the realm of possibility for that infinite to approach us, right? We, the finite, cannot approach the infinite. But if the infinite is truly infinite, he has infinite capacity and infinite means at his disposal. And so it's surely within the realm of his capacity to make himself known to us, right? Perhaps we cannot we cannot force him, right? Hey, you up there, or how come I can't find you in my microscope? That type of thing. He's not bound by our own tiny will, bound by our own very limited empiric means of approach, right? But he's able to approach us if he so desires. There's no obligation. It's not that we have any right, to make him pay attention to us. But if he so wills it, right? So then it all comes down to this point. How can we attract that, right? How can we attract that attention from that sweet Lord, right? And so the whole culture of love, service, surrender, dedication, all comes in on the basis of that point, right? So we have a whole set of principles, scientific principles, coming from that foundational point, right? And so one of these important verses, coming from Rupa Goswami, Atashi Krishna Namadi, Naba Vedgaya Minjiyai, Sevan Muke Hijivadao, Swayameva Sporchadao, right? That, he cannot be known, and this is very relevant to our discussion today, he cannot be known by our empiric senses. He cannot be seen by these eyes, heard with these ears, and so on, right? He's beyond that. He is adhokshaja, right? That is the meaning of adhokshaja. He's beyond our empiric perception. Right? So this verse is starting out like that. Atashi Krishna Namadi. His name, his form, his qualities, they cannot be perceived by our mundane senses. Nab Indriyai. Indriya means the senses, the Sanskrit word for senses. Nabavedgrayam Indriyai. But then the second part of the verse, Sevan Muke hi jivadao, swayameva sporchadao. That, however, he may be attracted by our service, Sevan Muke, service attitude or service temperament. He may be attracted by that, and thereby be moved to reveal himself to us. He can come down, if he so chooses, and reveal himself within the plane of our perception. It is according to his sweet will, right? That is one of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's favorite expressions, his sweet will, right? According to his sweet will, all rights reserved, right? Then he may choose to show himself to us, but he's not obligated to do that. And on our own, we cannot force that type of perception or experience. It all has to come from his side. And so then how to attract that, right? That's the whole question. And so then there are so many principles tied in with that. The spirit of surrender, right? And we have so much discussion of that, from our gurus and the scriptures, right? We have Srila Sridhar Maharaj's extraordinary work, Prakana Jivanamrita. And this is, of course, a collection of so many other expressions throughout the scriptures and from the words of the saints, Vaishnava saints. We have Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sharanagati songbook, which is also based on so many expressions in the scriptures. So this is a huge discussion, right? And that's also a science, right? The science of Sharanagati, humility, Doinya, Atmani Devan, Gopchuche Varan, right? Surrender and humility, embracing the Lord as one's guardian, cultivating this type of spirit, confidence in the Lord's protection, full self-surrender, accepting whatever is favorable. That right there's a type of science. These are things that are sure to help our progress in Krishna consciousness. Rejecting those things, rejecting that which is unfavorable, rejecting those things which are holding us back, and accepting those things which are helping us to advance. These are all like consistent principles all across the board. Surrender to Guru, surrender to Krishna, surrender to Vaishnava. All of these things, these are all, core, consistent principles that will help our progress, right? But it is true, that there is that spontaneous element. There's this one verse I'm thinking of now, and I think it's included in Srila Sridhar Maharaj's commentary on Sharanagati. I don't remember where it's from, maybe in the Puranas. But it's saying that, by following practices of karma, you can get some guaranteed results, right? By following some practices of gyan, you can also get some guaranteed results, right? And then following practices of yoga, meditation, you can get some guaranteed result. But bhakti, is more difficult in the sense that you can follow so many practices, right? And you won't necessarily get it. You won't necessarily get it. Why? Because ultimately it depends on the mercy of the Lord, right? So yeah, I mean, going back to what you said in your message, Robert, you're right in that sense. It's not that what you've defined science as, you do one thing and you get a particular result. You're right. That's not exactly the case here, because that 100% absolute guarantee is not there, because that depends on Krishna's sweet will, right? That depends on Krishna's sweet will. But again, we're given this systematic set of principles and practices that will maximize our chances. And if we can follow properly, then we must get it, right? Then we must get it. So yes, it's a very nice question, nice contemplation. But I do like if we think about like the study of natural sciences and plants, I do think that's a very helpful way to understand. It's like you're given some principles. If you plant your seed in this type of soil, get this amount of sunlight, this amount of water, this fertilizer, then most likely it's going to work out, right? And you're going to get your little sprout in your plant. But there's also that unpredictable element of life, right? And forces beyond our control, right? It's like you might be like, 95% chance, but there's that unpredictable element there, right? Because there's a force there that's beyond our control. So I think that's a very helpful way to understand how we can appreciate this as a type of science. Mm-hmm. And that reminds me, right, that was one thing that Srila Swami Maharaj Prabhupada, he emphasized and was really encouraging some of his scientist disciples, right, to promote this understanding that life comes from life, right? All right. Well, does anyone here in the room have any thoughts to share to the discussion, or any other questions or anything at all? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I was writing down a few verses, which I was thinking of, like, Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is, you could think of Bhagavad Gita as a series of scientific statements on the science of Krishna consciousness. There are like so many important principles that are discussed there, right? And one of the verses which or a couple verses I was thinking of, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadakshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. There's this verse, important verse in chapter 4, right, where Krishna is saying, if you want to get this spiritual knowledge, you have to surrender, right? To surrender to Guru, to surrender to the enlightened soul. And he mentions these three aspects of that approach, right? Sincere inquiry, what is it? Pranipatina, pariprashnena, sevaya. Right? That verse in itself, that just covers everything from one perspective. Pranipatena, the spirit of surrender, pariprashnena, sincere inquiry, and sevaya, the spirit of service. Right? So that's like that statement there, that's like a core aspect in the science of Krishna consciousness. Then another verse I was thinking, Daivi Hiesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Jarachaya Mam Eva Ye Prapadyante Mayame Tam Janantite. Another, very well known and important verse. Krishna is saying that this energy of Maya, my Maya, Mama Maya, he says, it is almost impossible to overcome, to become free from her. However, those who surrender to me, very easily, they can cross over. So this is another like core principle in the science of Krishna consciousness. And so many things, if we consider the writings of the acharyas, Jiva Goswami in particular, so philosophical, right? So systematic. Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and of course our modern day gurus, they've given so much. There's so much advice is given, right? What to do, what not to do, right? The 10 offenses of the holy name, right? Given in Padma Purana. All of these things, they all contribute to the systematic body of knowledge. How we can advance, what will hinder our advancement, and what will promote our progress in Krishna consciousness. Gangalila, do you have something to say?
Yeah, it's reminding me of Ayurveda, which is also translated as the science of life, and it's just like that. You approach it with your head and go like, what if I stop eating that? That should happen. That's so weird. And then basically, if you want to do something in Ayurveda, you have to do the experiment, and you have to try things out, and you have to give it time. And it's science by nature. You have to understand the nature around you, and you have to understand the nature within you. And it reminds me a little bit of what's been prescribed to us. It's like Ayurvedic medicine. It's trying to understand the nature of self and the nature of what if I start to practice those things. It's like we are not ever done, really. Also in Ayurveda, we keep improving, we keep understanding, but there is not like sick now, here's the pill, healthy now. It's not like that. So I don't know why I wanted to put that in, but it helped me when I was starting to think about what helps me really is practicing the science of it, and being in my own lap. My own lap is my own heart, my own medicine, my own adjustments, basically. I don't know if that makes any sense, or is that any helpful?
Oh, I think that's wonderful. I think just that phrase, Ayurveda, the science of life, right? That says so much in itself, doesn't it? Yeah, that's very, very nice. Thank you for sharing that. And Njumati has in the chat here, sincere inquiry and surrender to a bona fide guru, yes, but the encouragement of the correct inquiry by the kind, merciful encouragement from the sadhus and Vaishnavas to help us with the progress. I can't do anything, I know nothing of the principles without the encouragement of the devotees, with the twisted independence of the practice. Very nice. Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this in our last meeting, that there is this interesting interplay, right, between like following a particular process and following particular principles, but at the same time cultivating the spirit of helplessness and dependence on the Lord, right? And that, like, yeah, I'm chanting japa, but at the same time I can't chant. No, I'm serving my guru, but at the same time I can't really serve. Right? So there is a bit of what's the word? Paradox. There's a paradoxical element to it all. And I think the way that I would harmonize it is that and what I feel, our gurus, what we've learned from them is that, like, what's most significant about our practices is that we are demonstrating our sincerity. It's like we're sitting and chanting japa, we're calling out to Krishna, oh Krishna, hey Krishna, I cannot chant, but I'm trying to show you that I want to chant. And by your mercy, I may be able to chant, right? And by the mercy of my guru, I may be able to chant. It's almost like our sincere practice is a way of inviting mercy, right? And inviting grace from above. And I think we mentioned last week too, I don't remember exactly what the context was, but that that analogy of, oh, that's right, it was with Nazar. Nazar was bringing up some nice questions. We were discussing that debate about whether Sharanagati, surrender, is like the kitten, right, being carried effortlessly in the mouth of her mother, or it is like the monkey having to like really hold on with all its effort, right? And there's this debate in the Ramanuja Sampradaya. And Srila Sridhar says, it is both actually. And in the beginning, we have to put more of our own effort because it's like we're fighting against our own self. But then later it will become more effortless once, our soul's body is cleansed. But anyway, the point I wanted to come to for today's discussion is what Gurudev liked. The analogy that he liked for the magic of surrender and how it plays out and how it bears fruit. And that is in the pastime, that is demonstrated in the pastime of Mother Jashoda and baby Krishna, right? When Mother Jashoda is trying to bind Krishna, and she's always has two fingers too short. And finally, when she's like at her wit's end, she's exerted all of her energy, then finally Krishna allows her to bind him. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti, the great Vaishnava commentator, he gives this wonderful explanation that, what are these two fingers? One finger represents our own effort, our own endeavor in Krishna consciousness, and the other represents Krishna's mercy, right? So these are like the two magic ingredients. So which enable the chemistry, the magical chemistry of Krishna consciousness to take place. So, we are putting in the effort, we're trying to show our seriousness. We're following the practices, trying to develop our understanding. But we also understand ultimately mercy is the activating principle, right? And ultimately we are dependent on that. We're just trying to invite that grace, invite that mercy. And many things too in our practice are like clearing the way. Like, it's like we could think of our heart, like Gurudev. I'm remembering now one talk of Gurudev. He says like our heart's like a jungle, right? And he says it will not do to keep a jungle in the heart. And so in many ways, some of our practices are like kind of clearing the way, right? Making space for Krishna, right? Or cleaning the rust, detoxing, right? So that there's room for Krishna to dance there, right? Clearing out the jungle so Krishna can appear there in all of his glory. And developing a solid understanding, right? Using our empiric powers, developing a solid understanding that helps with all of that, clearing out the cobwebs, clearing things that could create obstacles on the path. So they're all, ultimately supporting in a sense, our preparation, right, for receiving Krishna within our hearts. Welcome, Ramananda Prabhu.
Dandas Vishaka Didi, thank you. One thing I would like to mention, Gurudev used to say, trying mood.
Yes. Or cheshta is the Bengali word. I also remember that so many times hearing him say that our cheshta, our trying mood. And one time he was saying, yes, trying, but the trying must also be perfect. Sometimes he would say, like, in a very generous way, like, yes, we are trying, continue trying. I remember this one time he was like, like, maybe the subtext was like, don't let that be an excuse, to like, not really do your best, But he was like, but our cheshta must also be perfect. Our trying must be perfect. Like really, really give your full effort. What one time he maybe a few times he mentioned something that Srila Sridhar used to say, that we should have this type of spirit, like if only one person is going to pass the exam, it's you. like like if there's only going to be one person in the class who passes, let that be you. Like try with that type of spirit, like only one person is going to get that top spot. Like make that you. Like try with that type of effort. Not like, oh, it's okay and I'll just fail this time, I'm trying, but really give your full effort. Really give your full effort. There's one verse I came across in the Gaudiya Kantahara saying that one should approach a guru with the spirit of someone whose head is on fire, runs to the nearest body of water. Your head's burning on fire, it's an urgent emergency, you're running for shelter with that type of spirit. And sometimes we may feel that, in some rare moments or seconds in our life, we may really feel the urgency, right, of Krishna consciousness. Utishata Jagrata Prapyavarani Bodhata. There's this verse from the Upanishads, right, that the first saying, please wake up. Now is the time to practice spiritual life. Very like kind of positive, rousing statement. But then the next line gets more serious and it says, spiritual life is like a razor's edge. It's like a razor's edge, very fine, fine line. And sometimes we get moments of feeling that clarity and urgency. And I think we have a question here from Naza. How to be polite with people who propose from heart some Mayavadi-like practice to join higher soul. Like this is very good and verified method by them. Well, I mean, I don't know if I understand your question fully. I mean, I think your answer's already in the question. You can be polite and go somewhere else. Sometimes we have to do that, Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about too, because now I was at Armat for a week, and I've been this last week at Mayapur, um, and there's so many different kinds of ideas, going on, and and yeah, I've had some. I've met different people like in my days here and had, invitations, this and that, but it really led me to think like, like really consider like I want my relationships, the people who I'm associating with, I want there to be that progressive element, like where is this going to go? Like, it's one thing to just have like a nice social circle around you where you can talk about how nice Krishna consciousness is. Like we can do that with many, many people, right? And of course, we can respect them too. But at the same time, we are cultivating something very specific, right? So who I'm like really going to give my energy to, who I'm really going to like have a 2-hour conversation with, or hang out with. I want that to be someone who's also cultivating what I'm cultivating, right? Otherwise, it's like you can go walk and see a nice sunrise, I mean, by which I mean you can have nice sensory experiences, and sometimes associating with other practitioners of Krishna consciousness can be just that, a nice sensory experience. Kirtan can be a nice sensory experience. Prasadam is a nice sensory experience. There are so many people practicing Krishna consciousness. And of course, we love them all, we respect them all. But in terms of who we're really going to like invest our time with and our energy with in a serious way, we want that to be with those who are seriously cultivating, what we're cultivating, right? With the nuanced understanding that we've received from our gurus. Otherwise it's like, where is it going to go? Where is it really going to take us? I can go and have a chat with my neighbors about the weather, right? But if we really want it to be progressive, then we want to try to associate with those who are, following what we're following, refining what we're trying to refine. And in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami has one verse, Sajatya Yashe Snigde Sadhu Sangha Satovare. He's like advising what type of association that we should seek out. And literally what it says is those who have the same type of affection for the Lord. those who have the same snigda is one word for affection. Those who have the same type of affection for the Lord as ourselves, and a little higher, right? Ideally, a little higher. But at least we can say cultivating the same ideal, or as it's phrased here, same type of affection, right? So, of course, I won't think I have any type of affection for the Lord, but I take that, in my case, to mean, particular mood, style, and points of emphasis that have come from our gurus, right? That's what we are cultivating. So we want to try to seek that out, And if there are some cases where someone's trying to pull us into their, circle, but we don't feel this is really progressive, we can be polite. we can politely decline that, And I was very, very happy. I helped a little with the making that publication, the Prema Vivarta, right, Jagadananda Pandit's book, and there's one line there where Jagadananda Pandit actually gives license to white lies for the sake of avoiding bad association. Like that's literally what he says. He uses this word koshalya. Koshalya means like type of trickery or an art. That and specifically he says for the sake of avoiding bad association, like he gives allowance for that. I remember we had a little team in Navadvip working on this book, and we were all like charmed by that. Like, wow, like so that's really okay, So in other words, you can make some polite excuses sometimes. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, I have a dentist appointment that day. or I'm just busy, or I would love to come. We don't have to always be like upfront. We don't want to hurt people, right? And more likely than not, they're not really interested in what we have to say or what we think, right? So we can be polite, say, I'm sorry, I won't be able to join that, you know. So I mean, I know what I'm saying now, some persons may not like it, but I this is what I've learned from my gurus. Indumati Didi, you want to share something? Hello?
Hi guys, Hare Krishna. I thought I'd just say one thing too. I really love that Naza has a great question like that because our ultimate goal is to be polite to everybody. But one of my favorite ones with what Vishaka Didi was saying, Mayapur and Navadip, they're of the same plane, but yet they're so different. And Srila Shuddha Maharaj, his conception is so high. And then we have Srila Govinda Maharaj, so sweetly giving us this love and affection to distribute. But you cross over to Mayapur and it's very different. The practitioners there, they have a different way of living and a different way of interacting, and some people are bedazzled by it and taken, where others are like, oh my goodness, I've got my japa to chant or my shastra to study. So one of my favorite things is saying, oh, I'm sorry, Prabhu, I have a really important savor to get back to. Which is true. It could be that white lie that we're being reminded of with Vishaka Didi, but the reality is we're trying to protect our own creeper, and we're trying to avoid that association that's not conducive or favorable for our own practice. So the best one I've been loving lately is saying, oh, I'm sorry, I actually have to get back to some savor.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Didi. And also, not we don't want to dishonor, everyone in Mayapur. That's not what we're saying, just to clarify.
Sorry about that. You know what I mean. We
No,
were
I know,
together.
but I just want to clarify. And really what we mean is that, when we're in our mott, it's a very like select focused group, right? But in Mayapur, it's very diverse, right? Because there's so many different practitioners who are part of many different organizations. So you just have to be a little more discerning in finding the association that inspires you. I'm just throwing that in case anyone who lives in Mayapur is listening. Please don't misunderstand. And I know that's what you want to mean too. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, like on the whole, like I'm kind of in a different place in my life because I was living in our temples like full time for like 20 years, from like the age of 20, um, pretty much for these last 20 years. Just like I've been like a really in-house practitioner. And now I'm in a different phase of my life where I'm like kind of traveling more and in different kinds of circles and not always like really exclusive focused SES mott, And so it's an interesting time for me. I'm just like I'm learning, like how to navigate different situations and how to like keep my focus on and like make that affirmation, right? That, this is who I am and this is what I want, this is what I'm about. And if you're not here to support that, then, I'm sorry. Like I don't have much more to say to you. Like, so yeah, it's kind of like an interesting shift, and but it's also, I mean, in some ways I miss those days of being like, 365 days of the year, in SCS Mount Ashrams. I miss that, but at the same time, I feel like this is progressive in the sense that it helps to strengthen my faith and affirm within myself, not that I'm going out in the world and one wind comes and then, okay, I'm going that way, but no, I'm sticking to this. Thank you very much, And of course, whenever I have the opportunity to be in that 100% SES environment, I'm very happy, you know, but it's not always there. So yeah, just everything is a learning, growing experience. The soldier should not always stay within the fort. You know, there's one quote of Srila Sridhar Maharaj saying that, and the soldier should not always be in the comfort and safety of the fortress, you know, but sometimes has to go out, you know, and face the world and maintain their faith, right? And their focus. There is this one story, of course, you know, not that I'm gonna apply that or encourage anyone else to do it, but just to show like how far this principle can go. There's this story we hear of one sannyasi disciple of Srila Saraswati Thakur. You know, he would go out collecting in the city. I think this was in Calcutta specifically. And there was one businessman he approached asking for donation, the sannyasi, and that businessman wanted to play a trick on him. And so he gave him one address, said, oh, please go to this address tomorrow and I'll give you the money there. I'll give you my donation. And so that sannyasi, Saraswati Thakur's disciple, went there the next day, only to discover that it was the home of a prostitute. You know, that man had played a trick on him. And so obviously, you know, she was very shocked to have a sannyasi come into her door, and he was very shocked, and he left, and he became very angry. And he went and vented to Srila Saraswati Thakur, his guru, you know, saying like, is this what we are supposed to do? Is this what you're sending us out to do? I even have to go to the house of a prostitute? You know, what is this? Why is this happen? And Saraswati Thakur responded very boldly, right, in his true style, saying, yes, we must be ready even to go to the home of the prostitute, right? We must be ready to face anyone, everyone, every situation, to see that and connect that with Krishna, right? This is the real principle of Krishna consciousness, that not that anything is to be avoided, right, but everything is to be seen in the light of the Lord's connection and the Lord's service, and to see everyone and everything as the Lord's paraphernalia, right? And the Lord's own people. That is true Krishna consciousness. So the most enlightened soul can face any situation, be with any kind of person, and maintain their own integrity, right? And maintain their own faith and their own solid position in Krishna consciousness. Of course, you know, for those, and this is actually specifically mentioned in Bhagavatam, right? You know, when it's describing the Kanishta, Madhyam, Uttam, right? Beginner, middle, and advanced Vaishnavas. This is a quality of the advanced Uttam Adhikar Vaishnava, that they can do that. They can go out and face anyone and anything and maintain their transcendental position. But then for the Madhyam Adhikar Vaishnava, it's recommended, you know, some discrimination, right? Avoid those. It is mentioned as a quality of the middle class Vaishnava. They avoid those who are inimical, you know, to their own faith and their own practice. Just avoid that, right? We cannot be like Nityananda Prabhu, you know, chasing after the drunkards in the street, or into the bar, or any situation. But you have to keep a little safety around you. Avoid situations or persons who will, you know, we're weak, right? We're in the hospital. We need some hygienic environment around us, because otherwise we're at risk of becoming infected. But once we have a very strong immune system, we can go out anywhere. and treat the diseased patients ourselves. All right, well, maybe we'll stop there for today. Any last comments from anyone? And yeah, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I'll be traveling this tomorrow night, early Saturday. So this Saturday, I won't be able to have the Zoom meeting, and I'll have to work out another time schedule too, because all the time zones are going to change again. So yeah, I'll have to work that all out. Okay, Robert. Yes, yeah, Robert, I forgot to check in with you. That was actually helpful if you feel your question was answered, but you said you'll review it over. And yeah, please let me know if you still have some question or doubt. Thank you for that. Oh, thank you, Gangalila. Thank you all for your good company. I'm very, very grateful for that. Jai Shri Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Akshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai. All the assembled devotees, sincere seekers ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Dibol. Oh, thank you all, and see you next time.